Thank you very much for the organizers also for having asked me to be the chair of this very interesting session. From solidarity to solidarity. I'd like to begin with the first person in our list, who is Sigurd Nøstberg Hovd, with a paper about Constitutivism and Phenomenology on sociality as a ground for moral necessitation. 40 minutes, why now? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let me also begin by extending my profoundest thanks to the heroic work of the organizers to make this into what has so far been a very well-functioning online event. This is special times, and it's very much appreciated that I am now given the chance to present this paper to all of you. I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint, and let's see if we can't. Just give me a second. Good God. It should be possible to slideshow. Okay, there we go. Right, so you guys can see this. You can see me just fine. As far as I've understood it, I have now 20 minutes to speak, and then there will be a 10-minute discussion or more if I manage to keep myself in shortness. Is that correct?
Yes, also of 25 minutes, okay.
Okay, perfect. Well, so I'm going to talk about constitutivism and as it meta-ethical position and how it relates to phenomenology. And I think this is my main thesis, that actually phenomenology has some tools that can overcome some of the biggest problems with this position. Now, constitutivism as a meta-ethical position is a position about the objectivity or authority of moral norms. It attempts to defend the authority of moral norms by saying that it's somehow grounded in the nature of the kind of being we are. This is usually being interpreted to mean that it is grounded in our nature as agents. Examples of constitutivism would be deontology. Kant's deontology is clearly a constitutivist position. The same with virtue ethics, wherein the virtues are considered are those features of us that defines what a flourishing human being would be, towards which we all strive. For a constitutivist account of agency, the constitutivist account of morality will its plausibility will depend on its account of agency, and this account of agency must fill two requirements. First, it needs to be sufficiently fundamental to make a claim about the inescapability of moral norms. In other words, it needs to account for the perceived authority in some way or other. Second, it needs to be sufficiently substantial to plausibly ground the richness of our moral obligations. Now, my thesis, which I'm going to defend here, is that the way the constitutivists have done this by grounding, trying to say that moral norms are grounded in practical rationality, makes these two different requirements to come into tension with one another. Nevertheless, that constitutivist have the resources within it to avoid this trick. and that the Husserlian phenomenology is capable of revealing this. So I'm going to in my paper my paper is based on the Constitutivism of Sigurd, but rather than going into her specific kind of Constitutivism here, I'm going to present what I consider the standard strategy of trying to ground the moral norms in agency, which Sigurd is also is perhaps, I think, the most clear representative of. Because in saying that we are bound by moral norms in virtue of our agency, Constitutivists is usually think this means this to say that we are bound by moral norms in virtue of our practical rationality. For this to be true, for this to be convincing, they need to involve instrumental rationality. And this commits the Constitutivist to the following claim, that we can make sense of the normativity of instrumental reason in light of an awareness of self that also places us in certain normative commitments to others. And here underneath you can see an example of just this. Now, in the past 15 years or so, Constitutivists have struggled with an objection to this view, which I think highlights the problem of this strategy. And this is was presented by David Enoch, and it goes under the name the Schmagency argument. And what the Schmagency argument says is that, well, the Constitutivist might be able to provide a way of grounding reasons to act morally in virtue of us being agents, but it cannot provide us with a reason to be an agent. And why is this a problem for the Constitutivist? Quite recently, Pakunainen came with what I consider a pretty convincing counter to this view, which I think also highlights the source of the problem, which is that the Constitutivist doesn't actually have to ground the Constitutivist doesn't actually have to ground reasons to be an agent in order to ground other reasons. That is to say, just the way that other grounding relations just the way that other features can ground another feature by having also to ground itself. We shouldn't expect agency to have to ground itself in order to fill this function. And I think there's something immediately very right to this. I don't think the Constitutivists need to inspire some kind of respect for the moral norm, for moral law in virtue of, in order to succeed. If I'm able to say to you that, well, what you are doing makes you a bad person, whether that person says, well, I don't care about being a bad person, is kind of missing the plot. If there is an objective standard for what a bad person is, then we have already grounded the objectivity of moral norms and have a good reason to condemn him. However, the problem is that the standard version of Constitutivism, which grounds ground our commitment to moral norms in practical rationality, is actually committed to this view, I think, because it's committed to the view that immorality or amorality constitutes some kind of irrational behavior. In this way, I think the schmagency objection highlights an unresolved tension at the heart of the constitutivist account of agency between a minimal conception of agency and a more public one. And the constitutivists it shows how the constitutivists used the minimal to secure the fundamentality and inescapability of moral norms, but uses the more expansive public one to secure its substantiality. And this is a problem because this leaves it open for the amoralist to just say, well, I'm just fine with this minimal version of agency. I don't see why I need to, what reason I have to choose the other one. But according to the constitutivists, their entire argument hinges on this minimal version of agency being somehow functionally dependent on the public conception of agency, and that doesn't seem to be the case. We can make very sense of the rationality of both immoral and amoral actions, be it a torturer that uses one torturing device over another, or a employer who amorally try to calculate how best to exploit labor. These are amoral or arguably immoral actions, but they aren't irrational actions. So this is how I think this can be solved. I think you can treat rational moral necessitation, that is the call of rational and moral rationality and morality, as grounded in different aspects of our nature as agents. That our rationality is grounded in a minimal conception of agency, while our morality is grounded in this more public one. The advantage of this, I think, is that it allows us to say the following quite commonsensical statement, that all rational actions are moral, but not all moral actions are rational. So if this is to work, I need to be able to show, the constituent needs to be able to show that the public conception of agency, which they have been relying on to secure the substantiality of their account, is also sufficient to secure the fundamentality of their account. That one and same conception of agency can do both jobs. And I think actually Husserl provides us the means to do this, that his account of sociality and empathy and sociality has some unique characteristics that allows us to do this. But in order to do this, I need to first say a little bit about Husserl's theory of intentionality and self-constitution. What we find in the later Husserl, Husserl of the ideas, as has been pointed out recently by both Sherodos and Han Jacobs, is that intentional experiences to Husserl are needs to be considered of activities as the pure of the pure ego, that there is at the heart of these experiences a position taken which bears by the ego, and that the ego is something that lives in these positions. This clearly shapes how Husserl also thinks of beliefs and volitions, where these positions, once taken by the ego, keeps having bearing on them even after they, as pure experiences, have been lived through. So to Husserl, there's a intrinsic normativity present in these rational normativity present in these experiences, both doxic and volitional, where a belief commits you, even where you are committed to the content of the belief, I guess we should say, after the even after the experience is lived through. And I think this says something interesting about, on the basis of this, we can say something interesting about Husserl's theory of empathy and sociality. Because Husserl, unlike the Constitutivists, did not actually see this kind of public conception of oneself, this relational conception of oneself, which is at the heart of the Constitutivist strategy to ground morality, as present already at the level of self-constitution. Rather, he saw it, this is clear, I think, from the fact that he sees it as the product of empathy, that it's only with the empathic encounter that the other gets a conception, gains a conception of themselves as a self in relation to other. Like, as he says in the Ideas 2, that the ego first get a conception of man as a close unity from the other, and then subsequently adds it to themselves. Now, if you see this in light of this, if you take this idea and see it in light of his larger, more fundamental ideas about the self-constitutive character of beliefs and volition, I think there's a sense in which we can account for the inescapability of this perspective without saying that it is fundamentally a fundamental part of volition as such. So what do I mean by that? Well, imagine what it would be for a subject to try to not to live, try to act as if they weren't a person who was standing in weren't the self once their own personhood is revealed to them. Clearly, this would be a case of bad faith. The gaze of the others, so to say, are already are from this on already always and already with them, and they cannot make an action without that action being an expression as them as a person. As they act on the basis of, oh, sorry, this these notes has become quite jumbled up. Let's see. In order to act from this point, they cannot help but act on the basis of this public conception of agency. But that public conception of agency doesn't, for that reason, play an intrinsic role in the normativity of practical rationality per se. So this opens up a way of escaping the schmagency objection, basically, because we can't, on the basis of this, say that we can basically agree with the amoralist that sure, there is no, I have no reason to give you to be an agent, but it nevertheless it is a fact that you are one in this more fundamentals and public sense of the word, and you are actually still committed, therefore already committed to the constitutive norms of this kind of agency, even if you do not care about them as a purely rational being. And that is the skeleton of this argument. I am very much looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say, and to clarify any things that might have been unclear as I presented it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sigurd. We have about 10 minutes, no, a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes of discussion. So feel free to discuss. Who breaks the ice? All these Wegners.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Sigurd, very much for your presentation. I had sort of two comments, and one comment is, so you use Husserl and Husserlian phenomenology in trying to sort of resolve and come up with a solution for this Schmegency objection. But so what about Levinas, for example? Because Levinas is also, so he's actually famous for his sort of approach by speaking about sort of this fundamental ethics. Right. And so what, how do you see, so what could you or we learn from Levinas? And so why did you choose specifically Husserl? So what Husserl has sort of better to provide in this argument than, for example, Levinas?
So yeah, so why? So your question is, well, so why does Husserl provide a better answer for this than Levinas does? And my answer to this has to do with the conception. Levinas' conception of the other is an idea of the absolute other, while to Husserl, you have this notion of an other as being as the fundamental act of identification in the apathic acts, that you are actually I can recognize you as another because I recognize some kind of individuality. And I say there's a sense in which this goes back to Fichte, right? I think this basic argument is a Fichtean argument in and of itself. But I think what Husserl does, which I think makes his account so compelling, is that he unties the notion of a public conception of agency or a public conception of identity from our conception of instrumental rationality in a way that it isn't in a Fichtean account. So this is kind of what I think is the thing that Husserl does that makes him very interesting from a constitutivist point of view, and why I'm not entirely sure if Levinas, you could make the same argument on the basis of Levinas' idea of otherness. Like, I don't think he would accept I don't think he accepts Fichte's argument in a sense. I think he would like say, no, that's not a sufficient kind of otherness. I guess like what a Husserlian ethicist, inspired ethicist could object to Levinas then would be something along the lines of, well, how do you generate concrete ethical reactions or ethical oughts on the basis of an absolute notion of otherness? I think the identification part is an intrinsic part actually of the ethical perspective. And that is kind of what I think Husserl achieves.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gintaras.
Yeah, thank you. I agree about answer that, Levinas approach is different, but my question about a little bit about art. I accept your position about that empathic recognition is very important for constituting of solidarity and self-constituting as well. I agree about this, but my question is, how will you decide which side is right in your empathic recognition? For example, take for example on the Polish border, between immigrants and Polish militaries. From the one side, if you are persuaded by propaganda, you could accept the position of migrants and the Belarusian position. From the other side, if you read, some Polish political comments, you will take completely the other position. How you will decide which side you need to apply empathic recognition?
So this is a great point, because it allows me to mention something I omitted from my approach, but I think from my presentation. So what I think this argument boils down to is that there is in identity formation, in forming an identity in relation to other people, I am implicitly already committed to some kind of understanding of authority. So claiming an identity which undermines this conception of equality actually then undermines the very sort of identity I mean to hold. This is a Fichte and Hegelian point, which I now am kind of appropriating from within a Husserlian point of view. And that provides what I consider an independent ground to talk about moral good or ill. So it's not just about your perspective is as good as my perspective. Question is, are my action self-conception actually in accordance with this principle of equality, or is it not? And in the case of the immigrants on the border and the people trying to leaving them out in the cold, there's a clear objective answer to this question. So that is how I see it. It's not necessarily that empathy in and of itself is morally informed, is morally tinged. It's how it's tinged, morally tinged because of the role it plays in certain kinds of identity formations and the relational nature of those kinds of identity formations. Is that clear?
Okay.
Thank you. It's disputable, but okay, thank you.
Okay. Sonia Rinovner. Maybe the audio. We should.
This is a classical mistake. Thanks for your talk. I guess my question relates back to all this question and this comparison between Husserl and Levinas. As you argued, Husserl says that the other being is a transcendental precondition for possessing a reflective awareness of self. I'm wondering how deep we have to dig in order to reach a so-called fundamental dimension of agency or human self. Because I guess that Levinas' objection would be that the other one is more fundamental for our self-constitution in terms of the other one is a transcendental precondition for my immediate awareness of myself, and even more for becoming a self in the first place.
Right. So what I would say,
sorry, my question would be, do you really think that what you explained is the last word Husserl has to say? Does he really stick with this precondition of transcendental precondition of reflective awareness of self?
I think like one thing I would say is that his theory of intentionality, at least, what he clearly does mean is that we must postulate some notion of pre-reflective selfhood to make sense of experiences such as intentionality as such, and that there is a notion of minimal self-awareness active in perceptions, judgments, acts of volition, that does not in and of itself rely on the other for its functioning. So the other does not actually play a role in determining the content of the perception or an act of volition. I don't actually have to have a conception of myself in relation to another to see the cup in front of me as a cup, or to make a decision that I want to eat a cinnamon bun for lunch. But nevertheless, so I think we must speak of a constitutive priority here, where you have this minimal notion of self, which is actually can function and operate independently of this intersubjective notion of self. But for you to have any idea of yourself as a self, that to reflect on it, the other is essential. And once the other is present in, and once the other has been presented to you, and through the empathic encounter, you are fundamentally changing the entirety of your experience, of your experiences. And from that point on, you carry the other with you. That doesn't change the constitutive level of priority between these two notions of selfhood. And I think this is kind of, I think the problem analytic constitutivists have gone through, which the Schmagency objection actually kind of reveals, is that they have gone from the assumption that in order for you to give and demand reasons, you need to have some sort of public conception of yourself as a self in relation to other selves. They've gone from that point to the idea that you need instrumental reason as such is guided essentially by a public conception of self. And that I do not think is true. I think we can speak of rationality without that. We can speak of instrumental rationality in thought without that. And I think actually doing so is quite helpful. I think it makes for a better theory of morality and sociality in the end.
Yeah, thanks.